Transitions need to be framed correctly. This is when you go from being in the chair to selling the practice or escaping the chair. This is a reinvestment phase. That's what Freedom Founders is it's a reinvestment in the next iteration of you. The question is not whether or not it's a good investment. Is it a good investment in your hands? The red flag for me is polarity. Polarity of parties. That division that starts externally, gets manifested internally, and we end up doing things against someone or for someone, but not for ourselves. So I think we need to be really cautious of how quickly we take sides. This is an important thing. Transitions, such as the one I'm going through, such as the ones a lot of us here are going through, need to be framed correctly. This is when you go from being in the chair to selling the practice or escaping the chair. This is a reinvestment phase. This is important. There are people here that are free for life. They reinvested in themselves. They reinvested in the next phase. We understand this in our practice. You add a hygienist, you spend, you pay for a new chair. That's a reinvestment in the practice. But an interesting thing happens with dentists, which is when they go to reinvest in the next phase for them, in this case, setting up an income stream that is not reliant on your hand, they don't really see that this is a reinvestment phase. That's what Freedom Founders is it's a reinvestment in the next iteration of you. And some people want to know, like, oh, well, maybe I'll just do it myself. Okay, you can do that. It's expensive. I've done that. Got the scar tissue. You can do that. You can do any of these, whatever you choose is right for you. But it's important that you own that you are now making a reinvestment in the you of you instead of just another chair. Now, this is where most of us run aground. Why? Because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust ourselves. The reason that you don't buy that new P90X program is because you don't trust yourself to actually do it. And so what do? Well, you question the results. Oh, well, I don't know. That person's six-pack doesn't look like the six-pack that I want to have. Or you explain to me the program. Or that. No, that's not the question. The question is not whether or not it's a good investment. Is it a good investment in your hands? It's important. Same for me. I'm in a situation now of reinvesting in whatever's next for me with more capital to do so. I have never been more dangerous to myself than right now. And if I can look at this next phase as a reinvestment in what's next for me, it's really helpful because I look back at my track record, I'm like, it's been a clumsy, stumbling route, but so far so great.
Yeah, we certainly have this tendency to put all of our investment on the front end of our education and doing what we've learned to do best. Lots of investment there, time, capital. Yet when we think about our future, we just kind of abdicate that, in general, abdicate that to others who say, I have the plan for you. Well, how do they have my plan? Yeah. How do they have my plan? Do they know me? Have they spent time with me? No, they have products. Well, we have these products of the day, and if you buy this product or you do this or this, then, well, somewhere down the road, well, can you give me certainty? We all want the certainty. Yeah. Well, no, there's no certainty, but we have a plan for you.
This is so important. We were just talking about this a couple of weeks ago. The embedded assumption inside the standard 401k retirement model is so bold that nobody really pauses to say, what is the nugget of assumption inside this beautiful algorithm that needs to be verified? As we were saying, I'm a fan of history. I have yet to see 2 generations. Can we just get 2 generations of Americans that have retired off of their 401k? Because I don't want to be the first, and I'll follow the second. But show me one person you know who saved their way through 401ks, IRAs, to a stable retirement without factoring in needing Social Security or a pension. I'm just looking just 2 generations. I mean, we're all in on this bet. We better be right. You don't get to be 65 several times. You hit that point and you say, you're all in. And until I can see a couple of generations of data, I'm going to continue to do exactly what you advocate for and what everyone here is doing, which is to back myself, to invest in myself.
We've got very major cultural, societal shifts happening in our country. You've been through those. Could you give us a sense of what you foresee or what we should be looking at in terms of trends? We've spoken about them in general a little bit last night. I mean, we talked about them a lot, but you lived through major volatility. What are you seeing in our country from a cultural generational shift? What generational shifts? What should we be putting our focus on?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of reason to be aware of or concerned about further divisions in the social fabric. The red flag for me is polarity of parties. I will not yield my philosophical, intellectual, ethical, or moral sovereignty to any party. I just don't. I don't. When I am presented with a red or blue, black or white option, I know that I have either yielded my sovereignty somewhere early on, or the creativity has died somewhere upstream. This is hard to do because sometimes we find ourselves very, very alone in our thinking and our philosophy, or at least with a group of weirdos like we are. It's very, very tempting. I had an unfortunate experience last night, which was to turn on the news, something that I typically avoid. And what's interesting is to jump between these channels, and it's just outrage. Everybody's outraged. Can you believe? Or can you believe? Or if you're a student of history, the answer is yep and uh-huh. Absolutely. That division that starts externally, gets manifested internally, and we end up doing things against someone or for someone, but not for ourselves. So I think we need to be really cautious of how quickly we take sides. One of the most brutal manifestations of this division was watching my parents, who had built their business through a violent, horrific civil war, which I grew up in, out of the post-war recession, which was rough, and watch employees that over 30 years, Rogers worked for my dad for 31 years. Rogers was almost a babysitter for me. He ran this little store that my dad had on his business, and I would do inventory count with Rogers when I was 8 and 9 years old. And by the time my parents fled under the cover of darkness with nothing but the shirt on their backs, having built one of the largest businesses in their industry in the country, they were run off of their own property at Club Point, beating on the vehicle my mother was driving, the family station wagon, and Rogers was the one who ran them off the property. To this day, my dad will say, I don't know about Rogers. How did that happen? My dad had been the same boss he ever was for 31 years. What changed? The narrative. Rogers fell into the trap of those guys have what I want and I'm coming to get it. And so that's what it shows up as. It's a sadness. And it begins with yielding our intellectual sovereignty or our responsibility, which a large part of the population, increasing part of the US population, apparently feels quite entitled to others paying for their needs. I am I have a very strong sense of social cohesion and support those that need it. Welfare, there are many, many people that do need, if we're going to be the nation we are, we owe it to ourselves, those that can't take care of themselves. That is as we say in Zulu, that is our privilege. In Zimbabwe, there's a saying, the oldest son, as I am, has the privilege. There's a term and it translates as privilege of taking care of his parents. That's my current privilege. I enjoy this, taking care of it. In the United States, it's a responsibility. It's an obligation. And I believe it's our privilege to take care of those that don't have what we have. But at the same time, we need to think about how to police the qualifications for those benefits in a way that's respectful, that is respectful to the very recipients. Can I share a thought about something completely unrelated?
Should I let him? I think it's okay.
I know I don't have much time, but
go.
this is just something that I'm just sharing because I hope that it frees up any sort of what I call entrepreneurial brain damage that you're likely to have right now. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was a gentleman, an engineer, whose last name was Shannon, Claude Shannon. And Shannon was working very hard then at Bell Labs and ultimately at Qualcomm on trying to understand how to separate signals with what is now CDMA, cell phone technology, and so forth. And what they were struggling to separate was the signal from the noise. And they figured it out. Qualcomm was on the front lines of it. And this is where cell phone technology comes from. How can we communicate signal and it be us be able to discern it from the noise that we're in? This is what we're struggling with right now. So I fall back on George Gilder's information theory of capitalism. It's a very, very powerful point that he talks about information. What I'm going to tell you, I hope, detonates in your mind the same way that it did for me when I learned this years ago. Information is and can only be surprise. Surprise is the only thing that qualifies as information. Why does this matter? If I tell you it's hot today in Phoenix, that's information, but it's not. It is of no valuable utility or application in your life. It's not. If I tell you that a plane has just hit a building in New York City, that's a surprise. That's information. It is not information unless it has an element of surprise. This is crucial. This is axiomatic to the whole premise of the information theory of capital. An information system is an economy. The transfer of information is what we're constantly doing. The decisions about whether or not to extend my crop into the neighboring acre of land or not is information that will then be transferred to those that will work for me, etc. This is at the root of our entrepreneurial system. Why does this matter? It matters because of the growing, metastasizing influence and control that government has inside the marketplace. Interest rates are the most valuable signal in an entrepreneur's or an investor's dashboard. They are. Now, what happens when interest rates, a signal of risk, interest rates are the flashing red, yellow, or green light on the dashboard of your investment portfolio. They indicate risk. That's what they do. They tell you risk. If I say, David, pretty sketchy character, I'm going to lend to him for 10%, but Brian, super reliable, I'll lend to him for 3%. What am I doing? I'm quantifying risk. That's what I'm doing. So what happens when a central bank turns to a privileged few institutions, you don't have access to this, and control the very mechanism of interest rates? They break the light on the dashboard, and investors are left flying without any indications of whether there's a mountain ahead or a valley. What has this got to do with information? The vast bulk of the bilge that gets pumped out of financial news networks, that comes out of Federal Reserve meetings and so forth, is just bilge. There's no information. In fact, there is a field in economics where people call themselves Fed watchers. Has anyone ever heard of these Fed watchers? And they pass out the minutes of what did the Fed say this week? Are we ever surprised? No. Why? Because their influence in the interest rate marketplace has completely distorted the ability to separate signal from noise. There is no signal coming across the investor's dashboard. Interest rates are broken. They are manipulated. And what this does is it gives us the impression of safety. And how do we know? We get into relative comparison conversations. We say, interest rates are only at 2%. They were at 2.5%. They were at 2.5% a year ago. Well, great. I'll just go back a year ago and take that 2.5% rate. This is not information. There is no surprise. When you run a business, you are constantly building structures and protocols and so forth in place to try to eliminate surprise. This is a huge mistake. It is the surprise of that patient giving you a 1-star review that is information. Something in the plumbing system of your patient's experience, there's a leak. You jump on that, you solve it. There's information in the surprise. But we try to build a portfolio, build a life, build a business that separates us from surprise. But that is actually what we need. Arbitrage is the pre-discovery of surprise. That's what we're all trying to do. But the thought of it terrifies us. This really matters. This really matters because interest rates, there is a complete perversion in the original sense of the word, a perversion of understanding about what interest rates mean. And we get excited because they're at 2%, 3%, assuming that they won't go to -5. That would be a surprise. Not in some countries. So the ongoing increase of governmental influence where they will tell you how to clean, how you need to clean the instruments in your dental practice, as an example. What the actual flooring needs to be in a medical facility is to homogenize diversity. Economic systems require diversity, not racial diversity, not ethnic, not religious diversity of opportunity and thoughts and ideas. But we are fighting an army who is using our money, and I'm not anti-government, that is trying to flatten the curve, trying to put girders in the way, and all that does is take what would otherwise be isolated risk and make it systemic. You know what it was that made me question whether or not this was actually the America I thought I was coming to? It was in 2003. My daughter was 1. And I took her to a playground, and it was rubberized. We've rubberized our playgrounds. The Federal Reserve has rubberized the playground of your portfolio. What happens to a rubberized playground? The end of consequence. My daughter's trying to figure out how to do the monkey bars. She falls, lands on some nasty piece of wood because it wasn't rubberized. Consequence. Risk, reward. I made it. I didn't fall and hurt myself. We've rubberized the playgrounds of America's situation, and we are nurturing multiple generations of people that will now expect the world to be rubberized for them. In my experience, having watched governmental influence and infiltration into the marketplace of Zimbabwe, you know that it's happening, and you know that the actual risk is getting more and more systemic because suddenly we have more and more rules. Entrepreneurs are constantly trying to be out there on the frontiers of discovery and diversity, and it's like whack-a-mole. Well, wait, you can't do this. Hold on, you can't do that. No, you need to hire these sorts of people. You need to, whatever. As we see an explosion in the legislative outpouring from DC, we know that this is evidence of deeper and more systemic risk in the actual financial system. These are very large trends. No one's going to be talking about it because you won't necessarily walk away this afternoon and say, perfect, I'll buy that storage unit in Tampa then. It's hard to connect it to our day-to-day experience. But it's very important that we do this, and so I'll shut up with this. As you pay attention to the world, there's so much information out there. No, there isn't. In fact, there's an absence of it if information is surprise. So little of it. And in my experience, the longer we go without surprise, the bigger the surprise is. Sorry about that. Thank you for that.
That's one to write down right there. Well, you got a little bit of a taste of what Candace and I are privileged to do every week. You can see where and a big part of it for me is learning to ask better questions. I've got a guide here who has massive experience, way beyond my experience in my relatively small world. And having someone who has seen the world and continues to see the world and explores it is someone I want to hook my sales to, because, well, we're on our frontier. We all are. If you enjoyed watching or learning from this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more content. If you have a question about any of my content or this specific video, just please leave a comment down below. And as always, stay focused on your freedom. I'll see you next time.